Hello and welcome back to our fourth video lecture dealing with differential analysis, decision making. Um, in this video we're going to go ahead and look at special orders. Should we accept them or should we reject them? Now hopefully by this point I'm sounding like a broken record, because in this video we're going to do the same exact thing we did in video 3 and video 2, and we are implementing those concepts that we learned in the first video, right? Being able to, say it with me, identify differential costs, differential revenue, being able to identify sunk costs and avoidable cost and unavoidable cost, and putting a monetary value to those, and in calculating, should we accept this special order or should we reject it? So let's just jump right in. So special orders, what are they? Well, a special order is it's a one-time order, right? It's not considered part of the company's normal ongoing business. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we're a restaurant. Perfect. We're a restaurant and we make, we just do lunch, right? We do sandwiches and burgers and things like that. And let's say that a businessman comes in and says, hey, I have I have 20 clients. Would you be willing to serve all 20 of us, but instead of charging us, let's say our average, normally we charge $10 for a lunch. Would you be able to do it at a discounted price of $7.50? Well, that's an example of a special order, right? We have these special people coming in. They want us to do something a little different, and they have a different price, or a different price tag on that. Okay, so when we look at these special orders, we're going to look at incremental costs and benefits. Okay, that's what's relevant, and that's what we have to deal with when we're looking at special orders. Okay, fixed manufacturing overhead, more often than not, those are never really affected. Okay, so those are not going to be relevant. We're just going to look for incremental costs and incremental revenues. Okay, so let's look at an example. Jet Incorporated makes a single product which normally sells for $20 per unit. Okay, a foreign distributor offers to purchase 3,000 units for $10 per unit. It's a one-time order. It would not affect our regular business. The annual capacity is 10,000 units. Okay, currently we're producing and selling 5,000 units, so we are within capacity that we could accept this special order. And if we accept this special order, our regular customers won't be affected, right? Meaning we don't have to take away from our regular customers to satisfy this special order. Okay, so should we accept this order? Well, let's think about it and let's do some differential analysis. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is look at our cost structure before we even think about taking or accepting this special order. Okay, notice our revenue, right? We sell 5,000 units at 20 bucks a pop. Well, it gives us 100,000. Okay, great. Our variable cost per unit ends up being $8. Okay, how did we get that? Well, our total variable cost is $40,000. If we divide that by our 5,000 units, we get a variable cost of $8 per unit. Okay, so that's good. We know what our variable cost is. So we need to determine the incremental revenue and the incremental costs, right? So think about it this way. Our variable costs, we remember from way back when, we know how they behave. On a per unit basis, they remain the same. However, in total, they change in direct proportion, right? So if we accept this special order, obviously we're going to incur more variable cost as a result of this special order, okay? So what we're going to do is calculate what's our incremental revenue, what's our incremental cost. We're going to net those two out, and we're going to see if we should accept the order. So how do we calculate incremental revenue? Well, this is a special order of 3,000. They want a special price of $10 per unit. Okay, so that means we have our revenue increases by $30,000. That's our incremental revenue. Okay, great. What is the incremental cost, or what are the incremental costs? Well, we take our variable cost per unit of $8 times the number of units we're going to sell, which is 3,000. We have an incremental cost of $24,000. So if we can compare the revenue with the cost, we see that we have a financial advantage of $6,000 for accepting this special order. Okay? Now, remember, we say that our fixed costs are unavoidable, right? Meaning they're the same no matter if we accept the special order or reject the special order. So because those fixed costs do not change, that $6,000 is going right to the bottom line. Okay? So in other words, we could say that our contribution margin is increasing by $6,000 because our fixed cost remains the same. That means our net income goes up by the amount of the contribution margin. And that's just a review from CVP analysis. Okay? So let's look at a quick check here. Actually, no, we're going to skip those quick checks. The reason being that special orders are pretty easy, right? Just what are the incremental costs, what are the incremental revenues, okay? Now, the next decision we have to possibly make is, should we, or let me phrase that, how should we use a constrained resource? Okay, what's the best, most profitable use of a constrained resource? So what is a constrained resource? Well, think about it this way. When we're talking about a constrained resource, that it means we have something that we have a bottleneck. And the best way I can describe it is think about an emergency room, right? You have people coming in, right? They're ill, whatever. And think about the process if you go to the emergency room, right? First you check in and get your insurance. Then you go sit down and wait. Then you go see, I guess they call them the triage nurse, right? They take your temperature, get your weight, ask you what's wrong with you, kind of screen you a little bit, right? Then they send you back to the waiting room, and then you wait to be called to the emergency room, right? Okay. Well, the resources that we have in this scenario are the nurses that handle the insurance part, that check the patients in, the triage nurse who takes the temperature, the weight, what's wrong with you, blah blah blah, you know, any allergies, things like that. That's a resource to us. And then obviously the emergency room, you know, the bays and all that, and the doctors, that's a resource to us. Okay. Well, if we have a mass influx of patients, right? Each of those resources can only handle so many patients. And at some point in time, there's going to be a bottleneck, right? Let's just say we only have one triage nurse, but we have 4 people checking patients in and processing their insurance, right? That department right there, that section right there, they can handle 4 customers or 4 patients at a time. But the triage nurse can only handle 1 patient at a time. So there's the bottleneck, right? So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to identify where's the bottleneck, what's the constrained resource, and what's the best way to use that resource. What's the most profitable way to use that resource. Okay? So we need to make a decision, right? When we have a volume trade-off, right? If we don't have enough capacity to produce all of the products and the cells and cells demanded by cells demanded by their customer, right? So if we have 8 people walk into the hospital, well, that triage nurse, there's a volume trade-off there, right? And that nurse possibly could, or that triage nurse, whatever, that could be where we get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, right? So we're going to see, and we're going to have to make a trade-off. We're going to have to sacrifice some products in favor of others, right? Once we look at an example, it'll become a lot more clear, okay? We talked about the constraint. We talked about the bottleneck, right? Remember, the bottleneck is a process that is limiting the overall output, okay? The constraint means there's a restriction, right? We don't have the ability to satisfy the demand, okay? That's the constraint. So we have to figure out what's the best way to use this constraint. So let's look at an example, okay? So here's what we have here. We have some production information for 2 products, 1 and 2, right? Notice we have the selling price, we have the variable cost, we have the contribution margin. Right there, we have the contribution margin. We have the amount of demand. We have the CM ratio. And we have the amount of time that it takes us to produce product 1 and product 2. Okay? So in this example, we have a machine, A1. And apparently A1 is our constraint, right? We only got 1 machine. So what we have to figure out is which product gives us the most bang for our buck, and which product do we take that constrained resource of that machine and use that machine to make that product first, satisfy that demand, and then worry about the other product. Okay? So here we go. We got a little bit more information, right? A1 machine, that's the constrained resource. It's being used at 100% capacity, right? There is excess capacity on all other machines. Machine A1 has a capacity of 2,400 minutes per week. So what do we focus our effort on, product 1 or product 2? That's what we need to figure out. So the first thing we're going to look at is how much output can I get? Oh, sorry. How much output can I get out of machine A1 looking at product 1 and product 2? Okay? So we know product 1 can produce should be 1 unit. Product 2 is 2 units. Okay? And I know you're probably sitting there thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Where did he get that at? Let me show you. Okay? Product 1 requires 1 minute to produce. So that means in 1 minute's time, I can only produce 1 of product 1. On the other hand, product 2 takes half a minute to make a unit. So if I only have 1 minute, I can make 2 units of product 2. Okay, so let's look at the second thing. What generates more profit for the company using 1 minute of machine A1 to process product 1, or using 1 minute of machine A1 to process product 2? So right off the bat, we need to look at, okay, which product can we produce more of? Who's giving us more bang for our buck? Okay, so let's think about it this way. Okay, here we're going to focus in on that contribution margin. Remember, I said way back when, contribution margin is a big number. It's really important for us because we use that. So if I make product 1 and I have a minute, how much contribution margin am I getting? $24. However, if I use that minute to only make product 2, how much contribution margin do I get? Well, I can make 2. The contribution margin is $15. I get a total of $30 of contribution margin if I make product 2 compared to $24 of product 1. Okay? So in essence, I should take that constrained resource and I should make product 2 because I get more money, right? Or I earn more contribution margin. Okay? So how do we utilize a constrained resource? Well, the first thing we need to do, and if I were you, I'd maybe jot this down for your notes. This is the first thing we need to do. The key is the contribution margin per unit, right, of the constrained resource. That's the first thing we need to figure out. So we take the contribution margin of each product and we divide by the time required to produce 1 unit. It takes me 1 unit or 1 minute to produce 1 unit of product 1. I get the $24. I take the contribution margin of product 2, which is $15, divide by my time, or the time required to produce just 1 unit. Well, that's 0.5. So if I divide those two, I get a contribution margin per minute of $30. Okay, so we should emphasize producing product 2. Why? Because it generates the most contribution margin per minute of that constrained resource. Okay. So let's see how the plan works out. Okay, how do we do this, right? How do we figure out how much we should make? Oh, sorry, let's go back here. Sorry. So because we get more contribution margin per minute of product 2, we're going to produce product 2 first to meet all the customer demand. Whatever time, notice I said time, is remaining left, we're going to produce product 1. How do we calculate that? Very simple. So the first thing we do is we take product 2 and we say, what's the demand? Well, the demand for product 2 is 2,200 units. Okay, the time that's required per unit is a half a minute. So if I multiply these, I get 1,100 minutes. That's the total time required to make product 2. Now the next thing I need to look at is I need to consider, okay, how much time do I have left over, right? The total time that's available on machine A, again, the total time that's available on machine A is $2,400 or 2,400 minutes. Okay, I've already used 1,100 minutes to satisfy all of product two's demand, right? So if I subtract total time available minus the time that I used to make product 2, I get 1,300 minutes left. So now I'm going to allocate this time to making product 1. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I kind of do the same thing I did up here. Okay, meaning I take the time available for product 1, which is the same 1,300 minutes, divided by the time required per unit of product 1, which is 1 minute. I divide those, and I see that I can make 1,300 units of product 1. So I'm going to make 2,200 units of product 2. I'm going to make 1,300 units of product 1. And in essence, I have efficiently utilized that constrained resource, created or produced the resource that gives me the most bang for my buck, which means the most contribution margin per unit or per time, and whatever's left over, meaning the amount of time that's left over on the machine, I allocate to the next product that gives me the most bang for my buck. Okay, so here's what we see here. We see that we're going to make 2,200 of product 2, and we're only going to make 1,300 of product 1. If we multiply those by their contribution margins, right, we get the total contribution margin of 64,200. Again, all I did was take the contribution margin of product 2 for 3,300 plus the contribution margin for product 1, which is 31,200. I get my 64,200. Okay? When we come back in our next video, we're going to have to determine the value of obtaining more of a constrained resource, meaning should we get another machine to produce. Okay, so tune back in for that one.